Okay, welcome to episode 54 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. Today we have a special episode. I actually have one of my own clients on, Emma Brady, and Emma has an interesting story which we're excited to share. Currently, just give you an update where we are now, currently over 20, 21, 22, 22 kilos down. Okay, and as Emma will probably talk about, she's weight has been on her mind the majority of her life as well, so it makes it even more significant where we're at the moment. And I'm going to assume she's had, like a lot of the listeners can't count the amount of kind of stupid stuff she's done now, which we'll talk about. So Emma, give us a little bit of a rundown. Firstly, let's start with when did you first start a diet, or when was that on your mind, and what stuff have you tried that you can remember? Give us a little rundown.
Yeah, I think like most women, I think I found myself in my early teens, feeling uncomfortable and unconfident with my body. I definitely wasn't the teenager who had any athleticism or background in sports, so I was always, I guess, the classic bigger kid in school type of thing, and I think like most people wanted to lose weight and feel and look great, but of course I think without a good understanding of nutrition or training, you end up diving into the internet and finding a million bad diets and training programs. And so I feel like I've essentially been the tester for so many, poor diets and experiences. But I think it really ramped up in my 20s when I started in corporate and stress, and then trying to incorporate stress, losing weight, and trying to get fit. Just was a recipe for disaster, really. So I think my journey has really been an exploration of every single bad diet.
Yeah. And where did you go to get, like, your advice? Was it magazines, or was it the internet, or?
Yeah, I think it started off in magazines and the internet, and I think, at the time all the print media was still out, where now it's still very much internet based. And I think at the time it's all like very poor advice, Atkins diet, no carbs, and essentially just crash dieting every single time, doing, crazy HIIT workouts. So I feel like in my teens there were less of the big influences, which I think was a good thing. But as I got into my early 20s, I definitely got sucked into, all the classic HIIT programs and things like that, which, resulted in just crazy eating habits, really poor understanding of just fitness and training in general, and so many injuries.
And obviously we've lost weight now, but that's not to say you haven't lost weight in the past. Like you lost weight using, as all diets we know now. Emma's pretty, she has a head in nutrition, you're interested in all this stuff now, but looking back, obviously we know, okay, calorie deficit is going to be the thing, but that's going to be completely different from how you sustain it. So you lost lots of weight before anyway and put it back on, right?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part is that I lost a significant amount of weight in my early 20s, so probably around 30 kilos or so.
Wow, really?
But I lost that through completely unsustainable methods, crazy dieting. And I think one of the most damaging diets that I did was essentially a cleanse diet, which was essentially no coffee, no alcohol, no grains, no dairy, basically just meat and vegetables.
Yeah.
And that was only meant to go for 12 weeks. And I lost a significant amount of weight during that process. But what happened is I also developed a chaotic relationship with food, which was so damaging because I was in a calorie deficit, but I didn't understand the mechanics of that. And that meant, I would eat a bowl of pasta and cry afterwards, and going back into that cycle of restrict, binge on what I thought was bad food. And so everything was essentially, when I lost weight through that process, I didn't know how I did it. So I was just fearful of regaining the weight. And the habits that I had developed then were all really restrictive and bad habits. So everything was a good or a bad food. And the training was unsustainable. You know, it was just running all the time. There was no resistance training, or, you know, I was tired, I was stressed. And when I look back at that time on the photos of me, when I guess I would be considered, you know, a socially acceptable weight, I couldn't see that in the mirror. That was gone, because what had developed in its place was a really destructive eating habit. And, you know, I guess what a lot of, I think, women suffer from as well was a really big body dysmorphia from losing that much weight through an unsustainable method, and striving for a perfection, which I know now as well just doesn't exist.
And even, which we'll talk about in a bit, but like a lot of women especially, we've had to go and then break a lot of that mindset and your thoughts around fat loss, and which potentially held you back before. But who advised you to do that? Or feel free to name and shame everyone on this podcast so everyone can avoid it.
Yeah, so I think I've had a really bad history of bad you know, professionals in the personal training.
Professionals, quotation mark.
Yeah, quotation mark. And I think some of, you know, I think it's very difficult to come across people who are professionals and qualified and offer good and sound advice. And when you're, you know, just coming in for the first time into a gym, you don't know what good and bad looks like. So the first person that you sort of lock onto, you just trust what they say. And I think that's... it's very unfortunate, because those the people that taught me those diets are people who are meant to be professionals and help people. And I think, you know, the interesting thing is that they get great results because they're crash diets, but they're not sustainable, and then you're left at the end worse off than you were before with none of the skills. And so you essentially pay someone to get dependent on a program which doesn't teach you anything, leaves you in a worse state, and so you just continue to pay out money to get, you know, either injured, which I have been, which is even worse, or with a really disruptive and destructive relationship with food. And then I think I'd really given up on finding a good PT.
Because how many, this has gone on for years.
For years. I think I've seen in total, like, the amount, 4 significant ones, the final one before you injuring me in a massive capacity, which completely destroyed my relationship with lifting. You know, so I think one of the interesting things is I just stumbled upon you essentially, and by that point I had gained all the weight back, was in a spiral of binge eating and stress, and had a shoulder injury which had debilitated me, and I was told, you're not going to lift again. So you may as well just put up with the pain in your shoulder. And that was really sad for me, because, you know, even though I'd gone through this process in my early 20s of losing the weight, like, I'd just gained it all back. I felt awful. I was now in a really corporate job, and I felt really stuck. And that's sad, because I think so many people are in that process where they're stuck, and they think the only way to lose weight is to do it through that fast and quick method, where now I've learned that the sustainable way is so different, and even though I guess my weight loss has been slower, I've learned so much over that process, which I think is a greater experience, because I won't have the problems I did in the previous, because I know how to sustain it through consistent long-term behaviours.
So obviously, being overweight, you're literally like desperate to get lean. Not everyone, but in your case and a lot of people's case, what would you say to people that are in that situation, may have lost weight a certain way, quick way in the past, and they know that's like reliable to do? How do you feel? Because this is a big thing people don't think about, when you've gained all that weight back and spent that money and time and energy.
Yeah, I think the advice that I'd give people is quick fixes don't work long term, because they don't teach you what you need to understand to have a sustainable approach. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that it is going to take time, that it took you a long time to gain the weight, and it's also going to take you a long time to lose it. But I think the beautiful approach of that longer approach is that you also get used to the changes that are happening in the mirror in your body, so it gives your brain more time to adjust to what's happening. And you learn how to enjoy food and incorporate that into your everyday life, because crash diets, they aren't sustainable. Yes, they get great results, but you're left at the end of it not knowing what to do, how to look after your lifestyle. And, that cycle is misery and pain. So it's that classic thing, if you don't do anything different, you're never going to get any different results. So, slow and steady does win the race. Yes, it's boring, but it gets you those amazing results.
Yeah, and obviously you understand now that anyone can lose weight after a few weeks. It's only then when your hunger signals start to kick in. So then obviously you've cut out all these foods, your calories are low, your motivation starts to drop, and your hunger is going up, but then you've just accumulated, okay, I've lost weight, but then physiologically and mentally you're literally in the worst position possible to put all the weight back on, or the best position possible to put the weight back on.
Yeah, and I think, quick approaches, they're really hard, and they often take huge amounts of discipline and willpower, which we know doesn't work. A more moderate approach allows for the flexibility, but I still think, regardless, losing weight and dieting is a hard process, and it takes mental fortitude as well, especially when the scales aren't moving. And I'm guilty of wanting them to move faster at times and having to wait that period out. But I think that if you accept that process does take longer, that it is hard, and you also think about what some of the challenges are going to be as well, then you're more prepared for when those challenges come up and to face them, instead of thinking that it's going to be a great journey and a great ride.
Yeah, I think which we'll touch on again, we had to realign our expectations, what we want in regards weight loss, if we're looking at the scales, because to what's out there, what you've maybe experienced in the past, completely different when you may go on a crazy diet and drop 2 kilos in a week and you expect that, but then when you go on one where you're no, 0.5% to 1% of body weight a week is all you're going to get. So if you're 70 kilos, 300 grams could be a good win, whereas you might think that's absolutely terrible.
Yeah, exactly. And before, I would have thought that was the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
I would have been where's the 10 kilos in 10 weeks type of thing. I would have loved that. But now I understand that the smaller is better. And I think as well, I've learnt the difference between weight loss and fat loss, which I think is huge, because once you start to look at that mindset, you're well, how can I hang on to all my muscle? How can I maintain that? And that switch is really big as well, because, you're looking then at aesthetics, rather than just the number on the scale. So I think as well, what I've learned through that process is that the scale tells you one story, but you have to look at everything else to understand what's happening.
Yeah, I know there's been times where the scale might stall, which again, it's gone to that's another expectation, what you need to set an alignment that it's not going to drop linearly every week. But you've used pictures then, okay, the scale hasn't dropped, let me do a picture, or let me try this skirt on, I haven't tried it in a while, and that's kept you going.
Yeah, definitely, because I think with me, stalling is a classic part of what that we've seen throughout training. I stall, that happens quite a bit, but what often is happening is that things are changing, and it's easy to see that in photos or using a piece of clothing. So last year during COVID, I threw out my scales and I just used this one pair of shorts, and every time I had a freak out, which does happen, I would just put that pair of shorts on, take a photo and compare, and I could see, okay, that roll that used to be there is now gone, they fit, I can tighten all the buttons up. So, I had to use different measures, and I guess it comes back to consistency and that mental fortitude of, well, I know I've been sticking to the deficit, I'm not lying to myself, I haven't cheated on anything, so I know that results will come, I just have to wait it out. Yeah.
And this is not to say that it's obviously always been like that. I think for the first few months or nearly even a year, we probably gained and regained the same 2-3 kilos, and it was hard. Obviously, you had a stressful job, all these things going on, and then we're trying to unlearn a lot of the stuff from the past, where people mightn't see. They think you come in, you pay me, and you've lost 20 kilos then straight away. But it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, I think the first year that I trained with you, there was a lot of mucking around.
Yeah.
And I think as well there were two reasons for that. I think the first reason is I wasn't cognitive of the fact that just because you pay someone doesn't mean that you're going to get the results. You have to do the work yourself, and ultimately, like, you can hold me accountable, but if I'm not putting in the work, then it's not going to happen. And the second thing is I was on a cycle of massive stress from a massive workload, and I was in a cycle of binge eating. And so I think the first thing that I think was really important, and which you taught me, is you're like, we can't lose any weight unless we get rid of the binge eating problem.
Stress, binge, stress eat, emotionally.
Stress, binge. And so that was actually the first goal, which had to be focused on first before any weight loss could occur, right? Because that's what I kept doing, just doing that cycle, and it wasn't getting any better. And, you know, you were using all the tools in the toolbox, but it wasn't until I had that moment of I looked in the mirror and I was like, this is not good. I'm stressed. I'm binge eating. And, you know, I sort of realized that I wasn't engaging with the process or listening to it, that I had to, like, turn it around. But I also think as well, like, I was injured in that process, and I went through this whole part of, like, understanding how to sort of rehab a shoulder injury, and get past mental pain as well that wasn't there anymore. So there was a lot that essentially I was still learning throughout that process, but the weight on the scales didn't change. But I think that was really important because I learned, like, what happens when you're injured, how you come back to training, how you have to work through that. And there were lots of things that I was learning through that process, but the scale didn't change until I was actually willing to do the work and actually listen.
Yeah.
Sort it out.
I think even during that, which a lot of people don't realise, like, I said, don't worry about the scales, because if we don't focus, this is the biggest thing that always trips us up. So you might be going alright for a few weeks, but then a high workload hits you, and then you go straight back. And I think when you're saying binge, like, you could easily consume 3,000-4,000 calories in a night, easy, like.
Oh yeah, easy. Like, I was a massive binge eater, and that's how I could regain 30 kilos within a year. Like, it was so easy when you are binging, like, huge high calorie amounts of food, the stress, like, yeah, I could easily, like, when I look at those 10,000 calorie challenges that people do, there were days where I could have definitely consumed that much. Yeah, 100%.
And that just comes back to the importance of whether you're starting yourself or where you hire a coach. I think it's easy to go in and someone pays you some money to start training. You go, okay, here's your deficit, like, let's go, versus going, okay, why have you not lost weight in the past? What's been the thing that constantly trips you up? And then if we don't focus on breaking that, and a lot of people, when it comes to habits, obviously, as you know, you can't just, I think too many people try to stop doing the habit, like, I'm going to stop binge eating, where it doesn't work like that. And that's why when we say trial and error, we tried lots of things putting in there when you got stressed.
Yeah.
What can we do this instead? And it was just constant trial and error till we find something that works.
Exactly, and I think what we did, which was really important, is we looked at the environment around me, and we looked at, like, where were the triggers, where did they happen. So, like, vending machines were a big thing, you know. If I hadn't eaten all day and I was stressed and then saw a vending machine, that was it, like, that was the start. And so it was about, like, building all these habits in the environment which would stop me from doing that. And I think that's what the difference is. I tried to challenge that binge eating before, you know, even with psychologists and the like, but it didn't work because it wasn't rooted in the triggers in the environment. And I think that's the big difference. Like, we looked at, okay, like, what stops me from, say, going to training? And it was because I would be stressed, and then feeling like I had to put my workout clothes on was too hard. So then I would get changed at work, so then there was no excuse.
Yeah.
I would listen to a certain song, and once that song had played, I knew that I had to go. So it just started all that process, and the planning of the meals, the having the responsibility of agreeing that I'd done that all changed how it all worked, and we started to work those things out of the environment. And I think the other big thing was we didn't say that I wouldn't not have any binges. We acknowledged that could happen, but just the process wasn't, okay, now you can mess up the entire rest of the week.
Yeah.
It was, okay, look at the binge, and then what would happen is when I started entering the binges into MyFitnessPal, I realised that some of them weren't as bad as I thought. And that was a good process because it made me realise, one, if you have one cookie, that's not going to throw your progress off. And then it made me realise like that if I did have an off day, at the worst it was 2,000, 3,000 calories, and that could easily be worked out throughout the rest of the week. So it changed my mindset of if you have one bad day, it doesn't mean you have to wreck the rest of the week, which I think so many people can't get over.
Yeah, just that all or nothing mentality, which you probably agreed you had in the past.
Definitely, like I was a control freak, all or nothing. If I didn't go and do one workout, I'd be like, that's it, I've wrecked the whole week. And I think what you realise once you integrate it into your lifestyle, that the all or nothing attitude doesn't help, and that you just need to be consistent in what you do, which is the biggest difference. So, you can still go out and have a meal with friends. You can miss a session at the gym, but as long as you're consistently doing things on a consistent basis, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing attitude, because you don't wreck anything. It's just progress. There have been weeks where I've been stressed at work and the goal was just maintain weight. We had a period where for about 6 months there was no focus on the weight loss. It was just, we just need to maintain the weight. I was looking for a new job and I had lots on, and that was another big process, because it was like, okay, weight loss isn't always the goal. Sometimes just hanging on to what you've got is fine.
Yeah, and that's even, we looked at like calories across the week, and I gave you the spreadsheet where you could put it in. I think we started a week on a Friday, so Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and even if you did go over, you would simply just calculate how many calories are left for the rest of the week, and just that autonomy in itself is enough to like take the shackles off a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, calculating calories really worked, and I know it doesn't work for everyone, but for me personally, I found it really helpful because it got rid of that all or nothing attitude when it came to food, which I think is so important. And so I was able to find empowerment in that. And now, look, I still track, but because I know what's in food, it's easier for me to understand what I'm eating. And, because I'm all about reducing decision fatigue, I just normally eat the same things every day because that's what I like. But I think that was a really important step for me, understanding that you can mess it up and that doesn't ruin your progress at all.
Yeah, and like you said, and what a lot of people that listen would probably do is they think they go slightly off plan and then they say fuck it, but they're normally okay, but it's the calories after that you're like, that's the ones that really throw you in the deep end, or like stuff your deficit for that week.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think if you just like, and that's the thing, like I don't keep things in my house that can make me mess it up either, because that's something for me. Some people can keep that stuff in their house. I just have never been able to, and I'm okay with that because I don't need like cookies and cereal and stuff in my house. I have the stuff that I want to eat. And so I definitely make sure that the environment supports the goals that I have. And that's
we obviously looked at binge eating, trying to do that. But within that, there's numerous things you want to look at. So it's not just as simple as binge eat. We're obviously stress. So within that, we try to put as much stress reducing stuff into your plan as possible. We make sure like we can optimize your sleep.
Yeah.
During that time with that job, like you're waking up dead in the morning, so we know obviously like your cortisol response curve is all over the place, so you're not peaking where you're supposed to, you're peaking at night. So that stress, not all the time we can lower that, okay, but then also we want to look at, as we said, your environment. If there's food there, most people are going to eat it.
We know that you can only have so much discipline, and especially if you've had a stressful day, and I think anyone knows this, you've had a stressful day, you get home and then maybe you haven't eaten as much as you should have during the day, so you're a little bit hungry and you're way more susceptible to just pick the high palatable food. And so I think that whole discipline thing is a lie, because you open the cupboard, you see like the Oreos, and then it's done.
Yeah, and how many times where you open the fridge, there's nothing there, and you'd be like, oh, okay. And you just get on with your day. But if there's something there, you would eat 100%.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think like even now, like when I go to people's houses and I open the fridge and see all the stuff, I've just never been able to live with that type of stuff there. And I think it's just, it's just testing your willpower, which I would rather not do.
Yeah.
But I think, if you I think a good thing is, you know, to try and educate a partner as much as you can, or, you know, family or whoever. And I think in the majority of cases, most people are supportive, and if they'll engage maybe in locking away some of their food or making it a bit harder. But yeah, I think, look, ultimately, if someone is not supportive of your goals, that's you know, a good thing to know and to sort of keep in mind. But I definitely don't think it's an excuse not to. It just makes it a lot harder. So you just have to get better at it.
Yeah, because the statistics of when one partner gains weight, the other one, you're more likely by 50%, which makes sense. Like if you're making weight gain easy and convenient, that's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the funny thing is now, is like when I look at it whenever I'm in the dating scene now, as most people are, but like one of the values I have is that if I go on someone and their way of connecting is eating a lot of food, that doesn't work for me, because I'm a person who values, you know, my health and my fitness and my nutrition. And sure, like, don't get me wrong, I have a very balanced approach. Love a good treat and a dinner out, but I'm not going to be that person who can sit down on the couch, watch movies, like eat a whole bunch of food, because my lifestyle is very different now. It's very active, getting out. And so I think you know, within a journey of sort of weight loss, your values do change and shift a bit as well. But
sure. Even one of my online clients, Ebony, she's lost 20 kilos up to now, and then she went on a date with someone, and I think they had basically 2 days of just eating like gone out to Burger King, Hungry Jack's, and the next day they're in some other fast food place, and then she's just like, this is not going to work, like, you're ruining my progress, our values aren't aligned here, like, this is not going to work.
Yeah, it's a big thing. I think you definitely have to find people who have like values alike, and I think because otherwise it just ends up, you know, I think that classic thing, you get comfortable in a new relationship, you gain a ton of weight, you're not sort of like watching it, and it's very easy to do that. And so I think especially if you're on a weight loss journey, you do have to be conscious of the environment and the people that you keep around you. And also you will find that throughout that process, some people get jealous and some people won't be your friends, because weight loss sort of is like a mystical, magical process to some people, and it threatens people sometimes when your body is changing. So I think be conscious that your environment might need to change around you and the people to support your goals.
So going on that, obviously we're in lockdown, which made life much easier for us in regards to controlling our environment. We didn't have to go out, drinks, etc., and people and work. But tell us, going on that point where people may feel threatened or jealous and then try to disrupt your plans, what was it like at the last job you were at, where you're obviously losing weight and people are offering you food, or like when you're making them look bad, they don't want you to succeed?
Yeah, I think like people got really threatened by it and really jealous, and then there's the classic thing of like, you know, bringing the donuts around and laughing because you won't eat them, and like people do feel threatened by it because you're changing as well. And what it sometimes says to people is my body not good enough? Like, and I think like my health journey has always been mine. It's been the decisions that I wanted to make for me. But I also think what's really important on a weight loss journey, and what was different from the last time, is that I have always done this in every stage, enjoying what my body is looking like, and honoured that process of having those new clothes, looking a different way. But it's never stemmed from I want to lose weight because I hate myself, which I think is a big thing, especially for women. And I think now, which is the beautiful process that I'm having, is I'm realising the body that I'm not going to sort of finish with, that sounds the wrong way to put it, but the body that I'm going to have, I know that genetically, you know, I am blessed with a little bit more muscle, a little bit more curve, and so I'm never going to be like maybe that stick thin model that I idealised in my early 20s. I'm going to look a certain way, but I'm really comfortable with that and cognitive of what that will look like, because throughout the whole process I've just honoured what I look like through the journey. And I think that's so important for everyone to realise. If you hate yourself throughout the process, you're not going to look after your body. So by changing that mindset and saying like, this is the only body that I've got, I want to support it, I want to fuel it with great food, I want to train because it supports my mental health as well. I think that's a really big switch, because then you realise it's not about punishing your body, it's about supporting your body. And you know, you get so many great like health benefits. Like I remember I'd sometimes look at, say, a hill and be like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get up there. And so that big difference in my life, being able to know I can go on a hike, I can go out and do stuff, I can wear the clothes that I love, I can feel great, and I don't have to constantly worry about what I look like. It's been such a like great process, and I think like lockdown for me was a real blessing because it allowed me to work from home, cook my meals, make everything. You know, I can go out on walks, I can go to the gym when I want, and it supported that lifestyle. So yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd remind people is that you can't hate yourself throughout the process, because that's also a recipe for disaster. You have to honour where you're at every stage of the journey and honour how your body is changing.
So obviously to start, you may use, like we'll say, the pain of where you're at the moment as a motivator to get you started. You can use that, but you're saying punishing yourself, and that comes back to like, it's normally tied into people's traditional thoughts on diets, where like they may think, oh, if I don't feel starving all the time, I'm not doing it properly, and they associate that with punishment as well. Whereas what you're found now, you're like, well, it's not really like that. We're actually looking at all the foods we can eat rather than saying you can't eat that.
Yeah, I think the primary motivator sometimes does start with I dislike where I'm at, and that can be from a physical standpoint of not being able to do something, or you try on a pair of jeans that used to fit you and they don't anymore, and those are very visceral reactions which make you want to do something. But that, you know, momentum only pushes you so far, because that's a feeling driven by pain and discomfort. But the discomfort from pushing through on a weight loss journey, you need to change like the goal. And so I think that's where it comes from, where you learn like it's about, you're not punishing your body through a diet, you are looking after it. And I think like with binge eating, that's where it comes into a lot. It's like a punishment cycle of when like binging, punishing because you binge, and it doesn't make sense, because why are you hurting your body because you binge, but yet you keep doing it? So I think when you change it and flip it around and say like, I'm going to fuel my body, I'm going to look after it. And I used to use exercise purely for like weight loss. I thought that's what its primary purpose was. And I think now I exercise because I enjoy the mental game of coming in, of doing really hard things, of lifting something heavy. And I realized that exercise isn't the primary driver of weight loss. You know, it supports keeping the muscle. And so I think when you change that as well, you don't use exercise for punishment as well, which is another big thing. You use it because it supports your goals, maintains muscle. And I think the biggest thing you taught me is you don't have to kill yourself to exercise. It's about slow and steady. You don't have to do HIIT, you don't have to run around. And I didn't realize when I did all that stuff, I was just adding stress and stress and stress.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the biggest thing is you can use that as a primary motivator when you first start, because pain pushes us forward, but then you have to change it at some point.
No, that's good. And even just touching on the training bit, especially women, there's certain women influencers that promote all this plyometric stuff, and obviously you being overweight, Kayla Itzines, Ashley Bynes, all these people that are sticks themselves, so when they jump around it's not as much stress on the joints. But after doing those programs where it's jumping lunges, burpees, like you're getting sore joints, sore knees.
So like every time there'd be like an ice pack on my knee afterwards, like everything was sore, everything hurt. Like I remember I'd sit in the bed afterwards and it would be like the feeling of like I don't know, like just been through like a whole heap of stuff, because everything would hurt. I was used to just being in pain all the time, you know, working out 6 days a week, doing insane cardio, insane HIIT. I'd wake up every morning and put my feet on the ground, and sometimes my feet would even hurt. That's how hard I was pushing.
But it makes sense when you, like, people are telling you all the time, train hard. If you want to lose weight, we're like, all right, well, that's what I think I need to do.
Train hard. Like I would look at those influencers and I'd be like, oh, if I just do that, I'll look like that. And the interesting thing was, the first time I lost all the weight, I didn't look like those people that you sort of idealize in aesthetics, in terms of like I had all this like, you know, I didn't have muscle. So essentially I was like, had a lot of fat all around, like still around my stomach, and I looked very different. So it's funny because I have 2 photos at the same weight now, and the way that I look is completely different because of the muscle that I have through proper training and not doing tons of cardio. Because before, I reckon like the body fat percentage I would have been is very different based on the type of training and nutrition that I was doing. And also, when you're training that hard and you're eating that little, it's a recipe for massive binges because you're stressed, you're working out like crazy, and then, you know, if you're only eating, like some days I might have only been eating like 800 calories. And some of that would have been coming from, you know, not good proper sources of protein and the like. That's just a recipe for, like, the binge is going, it's not if, it's just when.
It's when, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's, I'll see so many people do the same thing, high stress load. A calorie deficit is already another stress, and then a deficit like that is a massive stress, and then you add training on top of that, which is like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then Friday comes around and then it's game over. You've just ruined your deficit for your weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like also what was also going on in there is, I think one of the things that was a really big game changer, especially with training with you, was learning about how my periods would affect how my training was, what my nutrition looked like. And, you know, I've always been a person who's very susceptible to the hormonal changes in my cycle, which meant that you know, there is a massive drive for hunger that comes out in the last, you know, third week of my cycle. And that originally I thought was like the binging, but what I know now is that's a very natural reaction. So instead of fighting that, we moved just to go back into maintenance, which has changed the game for me because I'm not fighting against a bodily function, so to speak. I understand that that's a hormonal change, and I can watch that, see that it's happening, and I can increase the food to support that hunger and training without binging. So I think that was a really big game changer, and I think what a lot of women aren't taught is how all of that impacts how our training looks like, what our nutrition looks like, and that we don't need to fight against a function of what our bodies are trying to do, which is very healthy. So I think that for me was a big switch and really supported, like, that drive and hunger wasn't always binging, it was just that natural function coming out. And so being able to support that was a big thing, and something which I think is so important to advocate for more women is to understand, to track their cycles, to watch how that changes over time, and understand how their training and nutrition will change as a result and what their needs are.
Yeah, because even, so like we talked about first, we're looking at binging, and then we looked at your environment, looked at stress. I think this was kind of one of the next things we looked at, like this is a few months down the line.
Yeah. And
we're like, okay, this is a normal cycle. We first learned that your weight would go up massively, like you'd gain 3-4 kilos in that third and fourth week.
Yeah.
And traditionally in the past, you would think you stuffed it up, and you're like, why is this happening? Like, I'm in a deficit.
Yeah.
And then that would probably cause you just to say, fuck this, I'm going off track.
Yeah, 100%. It was like a nasty cycle of being like, what the hell? Because like it's a big 3 or 4 kilos is a big jump up. Excuse me. And so I would see that, and I would freak out. And so yeah, that would constantly, and that's why the scale would never change. There was one point where I was just stuck permanently at like 80 something kilos. And that was because I was probably losing, but then binging and just making it up through that cycle. But when you're able to recognize that cycle and track it over time, what it does is it now I can tell you when I've switched from being estrogen to progesterone dominant. And that switch is so impactful because like I know exactly what's going to happen. I know that I'm going to get bloated. I know that I'm going to look in the mirror and not be happy with what I see, so I can account for all of that.
Yeah.
And I know like I'm going to get cravings for chocolate, and that's all going to sort of like happen through that process. But you know, when you can watch it and track it, it's another point of reference for you to understand like what's happening, and it makes it less scary because then you understand, okay, I'm not going to look at the scale in that 4th week because I know that it's not going to be an accurate depiction of what's happening, and I'm not going to freak out. And so for me personally, like I also do see a big physical change as well. You can see the water weight on me, but once it drops off, often that's when I see more weight loss after it, so it hides it. So we sort of have to wait through those cycles of like seeing how it's all going to pan out.
Yeah, and that's even if we make a nutritional change, so we may like just bump your steps up a little bit or something within that time, we literally have to wait 4 weeks to see how that responds. Whereas before, and what makes sense is you'd be like, you'd look the next week, if nothing's changed, oh, okay, drop my calories further, and then the further causes you binge out, which is crazy.
Exactly. So I think that's why I think, especially for women as well, there is a lot of mental fortitude, because you can't do week to week. You have to look at it, on a month to month basis and see how that's cycling through. And sometimes you do have to sit and wait, and the sitting and waiting is hard. I anticipate it and I expect it, but even a month or so ago, we were having a thing where I just couldn't get past 70 kilos. I was just sitting there and it was driving me mad. And there was that little bird in the back of my head that goes, oh, why don't you just cut everything, take all the carbs out, exercise like crazy just to get it down. But it's just a game of waiting and talking it out, sometimes sending you a text message with a little freak out. But as long as you can acknowledge that that's happening, and then it came through and then it all dropped, and there's a big drop. But I think it's just understanding that it's not linear. It is a process, it is hard, and sometimes your head is going to tell you to do things that aren't right, but you just have to anticipate that.
Yeah, obviously I've I think you read most of Lauren McDonald's stuff, who's done all his research on women's fat loss, and I think is one of his books about that big, and that's he's only talks about a little bit. He's releasing another one which is equally as big. But what we did, so for the first 2 weeks, your hunger and appetite's all good, so we go, okay, we can do a little bit more of a bigger deficit in these 2 weeks. We can train pretty hard, we can get our steps up in those 2 weeks. Third week, we'll kind of wait it out.
Yeah.
And then maybe the fourth week, when your hunger and appetite are at its highest, we'll bring your calories back to maintenance. Because obviously we've learned you actually burn more calories in that week, so sometimes even going over by a few hundred, but staying consistent, you still could be in a deficit as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the interesting thing about it. And that, technical period where I'm coming back up to maintenance does give my brain a relief. So, it allows me to go eat things that maybe I couldn't account for within the normal deficit. But that is a good mental break, because I plan for it. I still eat really well during that period. I don't go out and just eat anything, but, I can have the bagels and the avocado and add a bit more fats or salmon and the like. But all of that, again, is another mental process of relief, and it means during that period I just don't have to worry about what is happening in terms of the food and hunger wise, because all of that's being sort of looked after. And then it's easy for me to go straight back in and reduce the food again. So I think that was a huge change for me, and it's really just really made me aware of how that does definitely change. And even the coordination and training can be very evident, how uncoordinated I've become.
Yeah, even again, if you look into any Lauren McDonald stuff, he talks about you mightn't do your complicated lifts, barbell squats. So what we do, we might use those 2 weeks barbell disc squats, deadlifts, where you're more coordinated, those higher complex lifts. But the fourth week, when you come in, and if you've noticed you're a bit all over the place, we might just do a leg press or a leg extension, just idiot proof in a sense, and that's just something to learn. But yeah, unfortunately it's not as widespread out there, but that's where it comes back to looking and saying and that was not just me telling you what to do. We work together in saying, how can we, obviously we know calorie deficit, how we lose fat, but how we implement it needs to complement your life and psychology, everything together. So having those 2 weeks, mentally you're well, okay, when I get to the fourth week I can eat a little bit more. So rather than saying you need to be in a deficit all the time. So it's interesting, isn't it? And that's a bit of trial and error we've learned to coincide with that.
Definitely. And I think there's the whole thing of the concept of diet breaks, and yes, they slow down the process, but it's important, because I think one of the things I never learned when I first lost the weight is how to sit in maintenance, which was so important, because I'd just gone fat loss, maintenance. I didn't know how to do that. Where now throughout this process, every 4 weeks I'm sitting in a maintenance period. So the first couple of times I did that, I didn't manage it well, because you're learning, right? So, I would maybe have things that I normally wouldn't, where now I just add in, I still eat all the meals that I normally would. I just have more of them, and I just have more room for some things I couldn't fit in normally. But I think that's really important, that you've still got to practice and use those same behaviours after, you know, you've gotten to the goal weight or the goal aesthetic that you're looking for. They won't just all disappear. They have to be integrated within your life. And I think, most importantly, I think people think that there's only one way to lose weight. And that's definitely not the case. Different things work for different people. What I did might not work for the next person. And I think that's the benefit of having a coach who understands your lifestyle, your stresses, you know, what might work for you, what might not. And it's definitely a process of trial and error. We did do things which didn't work. You know, so we worked out things like fasting or the like don't work for me because it leads for me to be open to a binge. So instead of that, it's like making sure that I eat, have everything prepared, and now I even keep things in my bag. So, you know, I have a protein bar in my bag just in case I get stuck. It's not something I'd always eat, but I'm just planned for all those things.
Yeah. And when it's only after all those like pieces of puzzle came together over a month, then we could start to look at the weight. But otherwise, it's pointless up to that point because like your behaviours aren't in line with something that is going to work, and especially going to work long term. So it's like it's the same as an investment. But even from looking at that, let's go back to looking at maintenance.
Yeah.
As we got leaner, which a lot of people don't understand, and it's become more prominent of coaching people over the last few years, is going for a few weeks or a few months fat loss, and then for you it was like when things start to get too mentally tough. So that's why you always look, how's your hunger, how's your energy, how's your cravings. On average, they might be a bit different around the 3rd and 4th week, but on average. And you might say, Sean, I'm just getting sick of dieting, this is very hard, I'm getting too hungry. You have to kind of catch it before it goes too far. So we'll go, okay, just go back to maintenance calories for 2 weeks. When we done it before, you didn't actually go back to, because maintenance is body weight in pounds times 14. So yeah. I was telling you to eat way more than what you were doing before. I think when you actually did it properly, after those 2 weeks, everything resets a little bit better, and you feel like you can go again mentally and physically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the struggle for people is that when you go through that period when you're eating back up into maintenance again, you do get an increase on the scale. And so I think that's scary, but you have to challenge that, because what happens is you're resetting everything. And then, as we saw on one occasion where it wasn't linked to my cycle, I just needed to eat more. As soon as I did that and let my body relax and then came back off it, the weight dropped. So I think, like, you know, as long as you're in maintenance, you know that any, weight gain that happens is going to be water and from the carbs and all of that. And I think, again, that's why you have someone to lead you through that process and help you understand, like, what actually is happening from a physiological standpoint, which is so important. I think especially females are led to believe that if they eat in maintenance that they'll gain weight, but it hasn't been the case with me. I've seen that I've been able to come back, eat really successfully, and then come back down again. But sometimes you just have to, as we said, there have been times where I was like, I just cannot do this anymore, I'm just gonna go crazy. So I think you learn how to do that, and you learn to listen to your body, which I think is super important. You learn that sometimes there's too much stress and you need a break. You learn when you need to take a day off from training, and you learn that sometimes you just need to have that ice cream, have that packet of chips, just do it. And so I think that's also for me, like, there are no off limits food. I can eat carbs, proteins, I can eat whatever I want, and because I do that now, I'm not obsessed with those foods. So even in the deficit, I still eat chocolate, I still enjoy that. I integrate all of the things that I love into my life so that my brain is never like, you can't have that, so it makes you want it. I can walk into a supermarket and even be hungry and not buy stuff, because I know that, well, I've got the hot chocolate that I have every night. I have the protein ice cream that I make for myself. Like, I don't restrict, because the moment you say things are off limits, your brain just tells you to want them, and that's a natural thing for your brain to do.
So tell us how you went about, because obviously in the past years of just cutting these foods out, and then whether it's going low carb, and then losing weight and then eating carbs again, you gain the weight back, you have that association with it. And I know we went through like just slowly giving you carbs each day and trying to learn that your body needs this kind of stuff, it's good carbs. Tell us how you managed to fit these foods in, and then maybe how you used to think of them in the past.
Yeah, I think like how I used to think, especially carbs were my challenge, which I think is a big thing. Like we're told that they're bad and that they're not good for you, but I think once you start properly training, you realize you need to be supported to use those carbs. So, you know, I think the first thing, interestingly enough, that I started in my head was thinking, how do I support my food around like the goals and training, because I would find if I didn't eat well, it was hard in the gym. And so I think that was the first start of that mindset, and just reintroducing basic carbs like rice, you know, bread and pasta or sweet potatoes, and because I demonized all that food. So I think it was just bringing it back, slowly realizing how that impacted me. And then I think with like the hyper palatable foods, which are much harder, what the challenge for me was like, I still to this day have certain foods that I probably won't ever manage to get over. So pasta's a big one for me. I can't eat pasta in any like small quantity. So I just don't keep it in my house ever, because I know that's always going to be a trigger food, so to speak. But I think for the other foods, what I did was literally just start to build them in my fitness pal, leave room for that. And then just start to eat them, because you just have to. And the more you start to eat them, the more you realize that you're still losing weight, the better it becomes. And so if there was a food in my head, I was like, I can't have that, I would purposely buy it. And always in small amounts. So, you know, when I want chocolate, I don't buy a block of chocolate, because I know that that's going to end up straight in my belly. I'm just going to demolish it. And that's something you taught me, you know, you buy like a small quantity. And, you know, in the work that I do, I also know the tricks, you know, that marketing, they tell you, you know, buy for two. And it's not because they do that because they know that you're going to eat it if you have two and keep coming back. So, you know, I just buy, even if it's more expensive, I buy smaller quantities because I know that that's all I need. And so, you know, there are foods now which I can keep in my house successfully, like dark chocolate, cereal and stuff like that, because I've been able to integrate them. And I think one thing I learned, I said to my brain, is it's always going to be here, so you can always have it. And once you do that, it's like an abundance of food, so you learn it's always going to be there. I would say, like, I think a lot of people do that thing where they're like, I really want a cookie, but I won't have a cookie. And then they go and start eating a whole bunch of stuff when they really should have just had the cookie.
Get it over.
So like now if I want the cookie, I just go eat the cookie, and then I just fit it in. And, you know, sometimes there are times where I go over my deficit, but I'm like, that's all right. Because there are days where I come under, there are days that I come over. So, you know, it's not always about hitting the numbers. It's just about some days you need less, so you eat less, and some days you eat more. And it's just about, there are no bad foods, there are no good foods. Every food just supports you in different ways. And I think once you've got a really good training program, you naturally tend to eat better, because you know that, you know, if you eat the McDonald's and you eat all your calories for the day, and then you've got to go train, it's going to be so hard. I know. It's so hard. And, you know, when I would work out, okay, I cannot eat this McDonald's meal at night, but I'm still going to be starving after that. So now, so often, I just support all my nutrition with really good proteins. And I find that I don't crave those foods so much. And when I do eat a lot of food like that, my stomach feels pretty crap afterwards. So it's just been a real big switch of mine. Nothing's off limits. I still enjoy everything. And I still have nights out where I go and have those big dinners and enjoy loads of things.
How has tracking your calories and learning what's in what foods, or like if you want a chocolate, this might be a better substitute, that's been a journey as well, hasn't it? Which obviously stands you instead now that you know you can go into the supermarket and you can do the calculations about what's in what.
Yeah, well, I think I'm like the queen of like high volume, low calorie food. Yeah. So I've learnt all those tricks that, like, okay, if I want maybe like to eat a lot of volume of food that, I don't know, would be considered like, a lot of people would consider bad, I'll just say that. I know which foods like to choose. And so that's been a big thing. Like, I know that, you know, I could have a Cadbury's hot chocolate, which is like 100 calories or something, or I can have like a Jarrah hot chocolate, which is like 56 calories. So I use different things, and there's things I'm willing to spend the calories on, and there are things that I'm not. So yeah, even when I look at supermarkets, like I do check for the calories and I really look at things, but I think the biggest thing for me is like I've learned that I do have a massive appetite, and so I do have to support that with like a lot of protein. So what I do first is I make sure all my main meals support my protein goals, and then build everything out around that. But yeah, I think learning about which foods you can eat more of is so great when you're on a weight loss journey, because that allows you to fit more in and enjoy more. And so I think that's super important. And then when you sort of switch into maintenance, the challenge is sometimes you know how to eat so much volume at so low calories, you sometimes have to change it because you'll get too full.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of like tricks that I've learned, and like I know that if maybe for whatever reason I've left it till the last point of the day and I've got to eat, like how to get a really good amount of calories really balanced. But I think you just start looking at food and understanding how it all functions together, which is so important, and like what type of stuff that you can use. So I think when you're in a deficit and you're really feeling it and it's aggressive, like there are like, you can use like lots of water, 0 calorie drinks I found are really like fantastic and really great, because you get a bit of like that feeling of sugar. You can drink them, and sometimes there's a little bit of caffeine which blunts a little bit of hunger. And so I think you just got to use the tools which support you and your lifestyle, and the more you do it and the more you track, if that's your thing, you understand. But I think it's just like, I guess we all know that if something comes in a packet, it's probably going to be, pretty high calorie and hyper palatable. Like if you walk around the supermarket, if you're eating whole foods, then 9 times out of 10, you're pretty much going to get it right. And so I think that's the big difference. Like now, even though I still, track on occasion, I know pretty much like what's in foods, what I can fit in and what I might not to. But yeah, again, I think it's all about that mental fortitude, right? And there's definitely days where, I've definitely just had maybe a packet of Oreos. Yeah. But I think, that's the fun thing about this process. You learn so much. And I think a big thing is, we have the internet now, and though there are a lot of educators who are out there who are false, there is a lot of good information you can get from the right people. So I think it's important to also be active in the education process and engage in coaching, and tell your coach what does and doesn't work for your lifestyle. Don't lie, because ultimately this is the lifestyle you're going to need to sustain for the rest of your life. So if something doesn't work for you, you need to be vocal about it, and you need to find the things that support you, and that's going to be different for everyone's, if you're maybe a mum, or you have a busy job like a nurse, you're on your feet, like different things are going to support different people. So I think it's really important to just fit what you're doing around your lifestyle and make sure that that's a lifestyle that you can sustain long term.
Yeah, no, that's good. Even within that, there's a lot of things which everyone I deal with, like who are successful with weight loss, do to a certain extent. One which we said, okay, yeah, calorie deficit, you can technically fit whatever foods you want in there, but we know like you could do that, but then you'd be starving for the rest of the day. So the likelihood of you sticking to deficit is going to be low. So naturally, the majority of our calories, say like 80-20, whatever it is, are going to come from high volume foods. When you say that, you mean just foods that fill you up that don't contain a lot of calories, veggies. There's even some good ones now, like 0 calorie noodles, whatever it is, obviously proteins and stuff like that's going to make the majority. And then the way you look at like foods you might deemed as bad in the past, you go, okay, that just contains more calories, that's not going to fill me up as much. This one contains alright calories, and I'm going to feel satisfied after. So you're doing that calculation. Nothing's off limits, but there's always a trade-off between I'm going to be left hungry, I'm going to be left satisfied. That's the way you kind of think of it now.
Yeah, definitely. You have to think about like how everything is going to support you. So that's the thing. And I think especially if you're a person who has a big appetite, that does have to be a consideration. And so yeah, nothing's off limits, but just different choices will result in different outcomes. So you just have to know.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I think when people understand that trade-off, you're like, cool, okay, I'm going to go out and have a big pizza on Saturday. You might just need to fast the whole day and save your calories for that, and then, or you may just have it early in the day and you may have to go hungry, but you've had your pizza. So it's a trade-off, or you may need to adjust your calories down the following days or whatever it is. There's lots of different options as well. It's not like you've stuffed up, start again. You can adjust the different ways now.
Exactly, and I think even if you do like stuff up or something like goes wrong, like that's fine too. Like we're all human and that happens, and those experiences just teach you so much. Like what was in the environment, like what happened as a result. And like I think throughout this whole process I've learned so much about myself. Like when a binge happened, what were the lead ups to that? Or when I went out, what happened? And I think now the really great thing is that there are so many great options in fast food places as well if you go out with friends. So like when I was first ever doing my weight loss journey, I would not go out and eat at restaurants because I was terrified of not knowing what was inside of things. Where now I don't really worry because, okay, there could be oils and fats used, but you know, as long as I stick to things which are pretty like fresh. So for example, if I go to like a burger place, I might really want the chips. I don't want the full burger bun, so I'll replace it with like the lettuce and the like and stuff like that. So I think there are more options and there are lots of smart things that you can do. And I think now social media has so many great tips and tricks. Like you can learn different things, you can find different places. And yeah, don't be afraid to like modify foods and remove things and ask like what oils people cook with, you know. But I think like ultimately even like sometimes, you know, I'll pick the restaurant so that I can decide like, you know, go to a place where I know that they do like a steak and veg and like, you know, okay, there might be some fat and some oils in that, but you know that that's going to be a pretty damn good option.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And what other, we'll say little hacks have we learned in regards to keeping you full? Obviously, there's caffeine's a double-edged sword because it's like there's times where you're stressed. If you push the caffeine too much, that can throw you over the edge. But like you're off for 2 weeks this week, and you're like, well, I can have a bit more caffeine because I don't have other stresses. So we've kind of used that at times where we're like, okay, this is a bigger deficit. Stress isn't too high. We can use a little bit more caffeine to blunt that response a little bit. Yeah,
definitely. I think like they always say like any supplementation or like, you know, caffeine and stuff is like the last thing that you sort of focus on. And as I've gotten leaner, it does get harder because, you know, there's only so much. Like I guess in most cases I'm a pretty small human. I'm 5'4". And so like there's only so much you can go and reduce the calories before it becomes unsustainable. So you've got to either use, you know, more cardio, or you've got to use other methods, right, for supplementation and the like. So I think that's been an interesting process. Like caffeine is something which I definitely do use and do find helpful because it blunts the hunger, and that's through like coffee or you know, like or Coke Zero and the like. Exactly, yeah. But I think, as you said, there is a trade-off, so you have to be conscious that it's not impacting your sleep because obviously not sleeping well impacts recovery. So yeah, but I think as well, like I've used now things like I've started to incorporate, you know, pre-workout and stuff like that. Obviously, again, has caffeine, so you've got to be careful. But I think, you know, when you get to that level, when you're starting to get a bit leaner, the focus does have to change like a little bit, and you have to be more careful because there are things that may throw you on and off plan. But I think the benefit is that I've got a really good understanding of how everything functions now. But when you're first starting, I think you don't have to worry too much about any of that stuff. It's just most people, if they just eat more whole foods, even without tracking, will get a great result. And if you don't have any issues with body image or binge eating or the like, then that's even better because you're off to a great start. But I think, you know, ultimately, as I get leaner, you know, it's now starting to look at like what will be my different goals once I get to that aesthetic. So it'll be about, you know, fitness and lifting goals and different things. But I think throughout this like process, what I've really learned is I've learned so much about myself as a person and what it takes to lose that amount of weight and the amount, you know, it's not an easy journey, and there have definitely been ups and downs. And I remember there was a point you looked at me and was like, you have two options. You can either get fat again or you can keep going. And I think the benefit of working with a coach is that, you know, you've known me now for 3 years. So you know that when I'm kidding myself, you know that when like I'm saying I'm in a deficit and I'm clearly not, like you can tell like what's going on. And I think that's the benefit of a coach because there's no hiding, and you can't bullshit yourself. So I think that is extremely beneficial in the difference because when you're doing it alone, it's harder to manage the ups and downs. And I think the biggest thing is a coach is an investment. It definitely is. But I think the first time I ever did it, I did it wrong, and I wasted so much money on crap programs. I wasted money on, food, and I wasted money when I got injured and then had to spend that money trying to rehab, spending it with bad physios. So the cost of not investing properly is, the cost is your physical and mental health, right? So I think when you invest in a coach, and if you can, it's so important because you're investing in not just your health now, but in the future, right? And obviously we're going to live longer as humans. And so I think that's the big difference. I think investing in a coach, if you can, having someone to guide you through the process is so important and so vital. And most people, some of the PTs that injured me, I paid $50 an hour. Well, of course, you pay that little. What are you actually getting? What are their qualifications? So I think it's really important, people equate that when you're hiring a coach and you're spending money, it's an investment back into yourself. And that person, you don't just sit and watch me do my reps, and you make sure that I remain injury free. You look when my mechanics of my body are moving differently, and you call me when and in a sense, you call me on stuff if I'm not, doing my best and making it up. And so I think that's the big difference is having that person who can support you, who's a third party, who, can look at your tracking, can make sure that you're on track, and can support you through the hardest process of the mental part of seeing not things move, of having the freakouts which happen, and just being able to text you and be like, nothing moves, everything sucks, I'm not doing a good job, and you'll be like, you've been consistent, you're doing it. But I know at the same point, if I messaged you and I wasn't doing my best work, you would also tell me that. So I think that's the big difference. When you invest in a coach, you're investing in your future health and living an injury-free lifestyle. And I think that's really big. I think all my health markers have improved over the last 3 years. When I was at my largest weight, I had problems with my knees. Everything hurt. Getting up was a nightmare. I always had headaches. I just felt really sluggish and yuck. All my health markers were all over the shop. And what's happened is, I have a really great heart rate now. All my health markers are good. I had issues with my liver, throwing up weird results. And so throughout this process, what's happened is a healthier and happier me. And most importantly, I think fat loss is really important. It's never been a shameful process, and I think some people equate coaches to shaming them for their body and what they look like, and it's never been. Throughout the entire 3 years, it's been a supportive process, and it's always been about the fat loss. There's never been any shaming when things haven't worked out. It's always been a supportive, process. When things have gone wrong and I went 10 steps back, you were always there and kept saying this is what we learned, now we're just going to go 10 steps forward. So I think for me, I think that's been the best investment in my health, in my lifestyle. And I got something which is really it's unbuyable in the sense that I now have a lifestyle which is sustainable, which I love and enjoy. And I used to come to the gym and think it was an absolute punishment. And now I can't think of anything better because there's a community of people, people support each other. And I think what I'd like to say to anyone who's on a journey or might think of starting a journey, people in the gym are really looking to support each other. When you see someone who is working on themselves and improving, that is so incredible. And having been, in a place where I guess I was considered obese and it was a really hard start, people really want the best for you. They want to support you, and shaming is not the way that happens. And all the greatest coaches that you're surrounded by as well are all people who care about the people ultimately and want the best result. And fat loss is a byproduct of looking after yourself better, which I think is where primary motivator comes from pain, but the biggest motivator comes from really deeply wanting to care for yourself as a human and an individual. So I think it's a massive journey that happens. Know that it will be hard and it will hurt through the process, but the outcome is, aesthetics are great. Look, I'm not going to lie, everyone loves a good aesthetic, but the outcome is a healthier and happier individual, which I think is so important.
Yeah, and that's even, like you said, punishment doesn't work along the way, and they've seen that reward is literally the biggest positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
But then that comes back to like, okay, looking at your expectations about what your goal is at that moment.
Yeah.
It mightn't be fat loss, it might just be breaking this habit. And when you succeed, give yourself credit for that, and then get all the stars to align before you do that. But even in case you didn't know, I just walked up to Emma. You were just looking at the PT board.
Yeah.
And I was just hanging around, building my business at the time. So I just said, "What's up? Can I help you?" Blah blah blah. And that was the start of it. But even from that, with your shoulder, which was something out of my realm of expertise, obviously, I so happened to just be working with Nigel, who I consider him one of the best physios I've ever seen. And then I think you got lucky there as well with Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was pure dumb luck. I was standing at a board, injured, overweight, just fed up. Just had come back from another personal trainer who had injured me, not helped me with my nutrition. I'd gotten nowhere. I'd gained weight, and so I was just like, oh. And then you came up to me and we had a chat, and you're like, yeah, I can help you. And then I think as well, like, the benefit as having a coach is the big support network. So coming across Nigel and then him being able to explain that the injury had been gone, but it was just the pain in my head.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Which was incredible. And again, it shows like how important it is to have a good team around you as well. And I think that's the big difference. Like, you're getting resources, you're getting incredible, like, vast knowledge. And I think as well, like, I'm a client who sort of, I work in an area where I love analytics and I love research, and so I'm probably an overeducated client in some aspects, but I think that comes from the fact that, you share things in the industry that I might be interested in. You share influencers who are proper, and you have a whole bunch of resources which people don't have to pay for to access as well, which is so important. And I think ultimately, if you are looking at getting a coach, you should be evaluating what their qualifications are, how they're going to help you, and asking them questions about, how they've helped clients succeed, and really understand, like, what is their actual process, like, what's their experience with people with injuries, and ultimately you do pay for what, you pay for what you get, sort of thing. So, if you're spending $50, that's not going to be a person who's going to look after you. You do have to spend a bit more, but it's about quality. And so, and then if it's something that's out of your scope, there are loads of amazing resources as well that you can try. And I think it's just about making sure that when you're training, that you're not doing things that you might need the support of a coach for, like lifting and the like. So I think that's really important. I still think fitness is super accessible, and I think one of the greatest things that I've learned from this is just how amazing walking is for fitness. And that is free, it's accessible, anyone can do it, and the more you walk, it improves your mental health markers, it improves cardiovascular, and anyone can just start a weight loss journey and start walking. It's low impact on your joints. So I would say, like, if coaching is not accessible to you, and getting in the gym and lifting big weights without any training is a recipe for injury, then just start somewhere, eating better whole foods, and just getting out and walking, getting out in nature, because that's also an amazing thing that you learn, again, from not punishing yourself, that being out in nature, going on hikes, doing things that you love, brings you a lot of, like, joy mentally as well, and that's super accessible to everyone. And then I'd say it's like using your critical thinking when looking at influencers and looking at photos. Even now, I know from my journey, I can make photos look amazing using different lighting, but like all women, I still have cellulite, I still have stretch marks, I still have all those things, and all the influencers do too. So just remember that what you're seeing and the pictures that you're seeing aren't always the truth of what's going on. Even with those people who look like aesthetic goals, like, if that's their only job, then they're going to look very different. So
we're just talking about that. Obviously, you've had last 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
Tell us, like, how easy it is in regards when you're getting 8 hours of sleep and the only thing you have to do that day is train and eat. Like, it's ridiculous.
It's so easy. Like, if that's all that you have to do every day, you can just sleep in, go train for hours, just relax. Like, you can prepare all your food. Like, if that was my full-time job and I was like an influencer or that type of, like, physique athlete, and that was my main job, then it's the easiest thing on earth to keep your physique, like, in incredible condition, because that is your primary focus. But you know, I'm a busy working professional who has a social life, you know, in general, and so fitness can only be accommodated in so many parts of my life. But I think the thing is another thing is you have to make time for it. So, you know, you can't go on this journey and not make some sacrifices. So, you know, that could be that instead of sitting and watching the TV on the couch, that you do some walking on the treadmill and you watch a TV show at the same time. And so you build those things into your lifestyle. But yeah, I think that's what's really important. Like, build something that's sustainable around your job and the work that you do so that you can keep it for the rest of your life and keep it really sustainable.
Amazing. And lastly, what's kind of the next goal for you? Obviously it's not just numbers based, but you're an analytic person and you have all those habits in place now, so it's a bit easier to focus on the outcome goal because you've built that big base. So you we're down 22 kilos nearly.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah, so I think we're down 22, but I think like the last goal for me is I'm definitely now focused more on body fat percentage goals. And I think now, you know, like I'd just like to see my abs once, just see them. Yeah. Whether they'll stay or not, we'll see. But I think like for me, I'd like to, you know, hit that goal where I can see them. I've worked really hard. And I think, you know, when it pans out, it'll probably maybe be 60 kilos is where I'm aiming to hit, which would leave me with a great body fat percentage. But I think like once I get there, then the goals will then change again in terms of more, you know, training and fitness goals. But ultimately, I think the last thing that I'd like to say is like it's you know, it's a massive journey. There's so many highs, there's so many lows. I've now been technically on it for, you know, 3 years. Sometimes lots more weight than others. Don't compare yourself to other people. That's a recipe for disaster. Some people lose weight faster, some people lose it slower. You're who you are, and ultimately what you look like will be the outcome of like what you put into it. So yeah, I'd say like for me, I'm really looking forward to hitting that mark. That might not be everyone's goals, but that's the goals that I'm working towards, to see at least the first part of the six pack. But ultimately, like I've learned so much from that. From now, I've got a lifestyle which is sustainable. I can enjoy it, and you know, move into greater and bigger fitness goals after that. But I'd say also what I gained, which is probably the happiest thing, is I don't have any body dysmorphia issues. I've recovered from the binge eating stuff, and I look at myself in the mirror, and even though I'd like to achieve just a bit more, I still really enjoy the person that I am, and that I still have loved myself throughout this entire process. So I think, you know, go easy on yourself, make sure that you enjoy the process and enjoy every weight loss moment that comes through as a milestone, and just keep loving yourself, because that's how you'll get the best results.
Yeah, amazing. Great advice. I might actually do a video one day. We're going to train Emma and we're going to put a weight vest on with 22 kilos just to show you how we're moving around before, so we'll post that up. But amazing advice. Thank you again for coming on, and we'll get you back on in the future anyway.
Awesome.